Welcome to Bitcoin Escape Plan. We're at a crucial moment right now in Bitcoin that will decide the momentum, whether it goes to the upside again or whether we start crashing back down towards 60K and below. In today's video, we're going to go over what the likely signs are that we are headed higher temporarily before then seeing those drops lower. We always start off with the 4-hour time frame before jumping to the higher time frames. And later on in the video, I will go over the 4-hour trade setups. I did not take these trades. However, they are pretty interesting. I'll look at those later on in the video. If you are new to the channel in general, you can check out bitcoinescapeplan.com. Every Monday, I release a newsletter that goes over the key levels that you're going to have to pay attention to for the week. Usually very helpful just to have like a bird's eye view of what's going on with the price across the time frames if you don't have time to listen to me here on YouTube. All right, let's get into it. On the 4-hour chart, just had a really important retest of that 73.8K Fibonacci pivot. Went to about $73,933 before failing. That is slightly lower than 74,075 over on the previous Wednesday of last week. This is an important signal. Technically, that is a lower high. However, we shot right to it initially. So this was like euphoric. It would have been really hard to trade that accurately. Whereas this one has been much more steady. Like we're actually starting to build up the volume a little bit in this area. You know, we're starting to form sort of a base, a point of control for the price to actually establish from, which is super important because if you look at the anchored volume profile right at about where we are now and above, we're super thin between here and about 81.7K. And the higher we get towards that, all of these people who had previously bought above 90K are going to be looking at this region as an attractive opportunity for them to reduce their total losses. Rather than taking 25 or 30% losses down here, they can take a 5 or 10% haircut up here, which is going to drive the psychology of the markets moving forward for the rest of this year. I don't hear anyone else talking about that. I don't really understand why I don't hear other people talking about that. A lot of people just want to talk about how it's going to continue to go up and to the right forever, and that's not reality. So we're going to take a look at a couple of those signs here on the chart. So first one we always like to take a look at is the anchored VWAP. This is the Elder VWAP. This is the one drawn from 2011. Like we've talked about in other videos, we are in an uptrend after recovering favorably Sunday, March 8th there, well above that Fibonacci pivot. We had previously broken below it at the end of February, but still maintained pretty good strength on it. And basically, psychologically speaking, what that means is, like, I like to think of it like a magnet essentially, and the price will get pulled from, it was at the upper band, it broke the upper band, went all the way down to the middle band, and then it's going to sort of hover around the middle band for a little bit until it decides which has more momentum, another retest to the upper band, or if it's ready to commit towards that lower band. And the upper band at the moment for the Elder VWAP, I believe, is somewhere like 96K. Should be this guy, which is 95.25, which would be the highest realistically that the price could express. I don't think it's going to go there personally. I think it will get stopped out before then. I think it's more likely that it actually is going to touch this guy, which is the middle band of the downtrend anchored VWAP that I drew from the 126 all-time high. So these anchored VWAPs are telling us two very distinctly different things. This one is telling us what the trend has been since the all-time high. This one is telling us what the trend has been since the lows in 2011. So very different in terms of the time frame, but pretty important just for us to see it's getting tighter and tighter. This middle band has been rising and is now starting to flatten a little bit. And then obviously the bottom band of the downtrend anchor VWAP has just been dropping, since we lost it, I believe, in January. We had dipped below it in November, rose above it, and then lost it in spectacular fashion in January. So at the moment, we're seeing those two trends converge. Meaning, if we have a strong reaction to the middle band, again, it's going to trend toward that upper band, which is at 95.4 or whatever the number was that I just said. However, this downtrend anchor VWAP, which continues to trend downward and will continue to trend downward. That's at about 70.1K. We hit it right at around 70.2, 70.4, like we have been talking about in other videos. And at the moment, it's the same thing. When we have a strong reaction to the bottom band, it's going, and in this case, the price has been below it, and now it is rising above it, and the price is trying to see, can it remain above it, which is largely going to be determined by these Fibonacci pivots. And those Fibonacci pivots are very close to those psychological levels that I've been talking about in previous levels. 73.8K is literally the March of 2024 all-time high, early in the halving year. I think that shifted the gravity of the price of Bitcoin. That's why we didn't go to 130 or 150, is because we already saw a significant early new all-time high in the halving year in 2024, right after the ETFs were launched. Huge liquidity. At the end of the day, this is a supply and demand vehicle. You know, it is determined based on liquidity. Like, that's how the price moves. So I think it's a combination of that and the psychology of the numbers. So 69K, super important, because that was the 2021 all-time high. And that's currently what the price is looking to have confirmation of, is do we have support at that level? And we're starting to form it. You know, this is a decent amount of people who bought and sold in those levels. They actually stepped in, you know, to increase the amount of volume in the market at that time, which is exactly what we would need. You know, but I think realistically what's going to happen is we're going to see a changing of hands. The people who are up here, who have a cost basis of 90K plus, some of those people, when we get down to here, again, they're going to be comfortable with a 5 or 10% loss instead of a 20 or 30% loss. And they're going to sell, which is going to thin out all the prices up here, which makes it even less likely that we are going to go to those prices, because there's no one defending those prices once they have been sold. So what that means is this battlefield in here between about 71.5K and really up to here to 86 is going to be hard fought. Like, it's going to have to be new liquidity that comes in, or it has to be these individuals selling and then deciding to rebuy, which would not make sense in that particular instance. If you've been down for a year, you have an opportunity to take a haircut, the last thing that you're going to do is buy more Bitcoin after you do that. That's going to be the psychology of these individuals. So that middle band of the downtrend anchor VWAP, like I said, sitting at 85.5K. And that's for me, that's the highest I believe that the price will go right now. And now we'll jump to the higher time frames to show why I believe that. You know, we've talked about this pretty much in every video recently. We can see it a little bit easier on the weekly, but let's briefly talk about the idea on the monthly. So the idea on the monthly is, once we have broken this monthly SMA, it takes a long time for us to get back to it. There is no precedent in the history of Bitcoin for us to lose that monthly SMA and to immediately snap back to it. I believe the shortest period of time was about 6 months, which would still leave us a minimum of 2 months before we retest it. And I don't believe that is the most likely scenario, personally. We just don't have a lot of evidence for it doing that. Like here, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 months that it was below it in 2022. I believe it was a little bit less here. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 months in 2018, 2019. And I believe it was similar in the earlier cycle, and it doesn't really matter because Bitcoin was very inexpensive then. It doesn't really behave exactly the same way now, but the last 2 cycles are more than enough information for us. So regardless, what that means is we can expect between, let's call it 7 and 15 months where we're going to be below this monthly SMA before we just recover it. And that's not even rising above it, you know, although again, that should happen by the end of next year. I mean, I've talked about it broadly many times on this channel. I believe if they could only run one news story for all of 2026, it is how low can Bitcoin go? I believe that's somewhere between 34 and 39K personally. I'm not going to go over that in this video. I've talked about that in a bunch of different videos. Just going over the overall trend right now before we dive into the weekly. Then I'll go over the trades, and then we'll move on with our days. It's going to be a great day. The 76.2K pivot and the 64K pivot, we're stuck right between those at the moment. We are currently slightly above the 50% mark there, And that is going to be our biggest indication of, are we able to get this end of March into mid-April? I see it as another failure of the weekly SMA. That's what I believe is going to happen. Again, on the monthly, we have no expectation that we are going to get back to those levels. So again, that's our baseline. This is the monthly SMA. What history tells us is we are not going to touch it again for 7 to 15 months, meaning the price is not going to touch 90.3K or higher again for 7 to 15 months total, which would be another, whatever, call it 3 to 4 to like 11 months. I don't think it's going to be 11 months, but it'll be an extended period of time is the point. Now, in the weekly SMA, we've spent a lot more time between those Fibonacci pivots. It's the same Fibonacci pivots for the monthly and the weekly time frame. We are now at the point that I've been talking about in other videos that we want to be at. We want to be above the 50% mark, basically above 70.2, 70.4, right around there. If we can close this week above that, that's good. Why is that good? It gives us permission to go to the top side of that range towards 76.2K. Now, we do want that to be quicker. If we can, close this month even a little bit higher than we are right now, I mean, 71.9 is acceptable. That puts us comfortably above 69, 69 would really be like where we would need to see support form if we're going to get another legitimate push towards it. But same thing as the monthly SMA. If we look at the history of what happens when the weekly SMA retests in this position. So where are we? This is in March. It's coming out of a consolidation and starting to rise higher. What does it do? It retests the weekly SMA and fails at that 47.6K pivot. Now that originally, we've talked about on this channel, that would have been, if we had a retest of 96K, that would have been exactly 2 times that price. That's what I've been watching for a long time. However, this SMA continues to get pulled down lower and lower and lower, which to me tells me that it's going to function as resistance instead of like a major bullish flip, and it'll probably be temporary, the same way that it was here. This is a temporary retest above the weekly SMA that fails this Fibonacci pivot. So it really depends on how many weeks does it take for us to get to the bottom, the center of the Tootsie Pop, that 76.2K pivot. If we can quickly get above that, then I think that we're fine for a flip of that again, I don't personally believe is going to go higher than about here, which is 86.5K. It would be very hard for me to believe that the price is going to go higher than that. It might wick to that. It might even get a candle close above that. I think it's going to fail spectacularly after it does that, which means we're probably going to have an interaction with the SMA, which again is still being pulled down. Even in this best case scenario, even if the price still, goes higher, it closes right below 76.2K on Sunday of this week, that SMA is still going to get pulled down. It's still going to get pulled down. It's still going to get pulled closer towards the 80K pivot. And then we would need to rocket right to it next week for it to stay above. Again, there's nothing preventing that Fibonacci pivot from coming all the way down here to 76.2K by the time we actually interact with it. But realistically, even if we're able to form support at that 69K level and at 73.8, which I think it's going to be more support at 69K and fairly flimsy support at 73.8K. You can see here, 67 stepped in quite a bit. 73.8 did not. It's still pretty low volume, very, very low. So it's not really going to be enough volume or momentum for price to react strongly to it on the way back down. Probably going to push right through that and go right to that 69K support. 69K in general right now would be a nice long entry for this little move here. I saw that on another channel that I like watching. I don't know if I believe it at the moment. We kind of have to see like there is some room for a downtrend again, but the daily is behaving fairly well, and it hasn't been for a long time. So it's also quite possible that we just keep running. But yeah, on the weekly time frame, that's broadly what we are looking for. Before I get into the trade analysis, is the weekly SMA is going to continue to get pulled down as long as we are below it. Until we have a reaction to it, then it can maybe thin out, possibly even flip back up, but we don't really have precedent for it doing that. Even if we go back to the older one, this one we broke it in a different time period. We are already broken it, I believe, by October or November of this cycle, whereas it took a lot longer here, but pretty much same thing, where in this instance, it had its retest in February, March before failing, and then it didn't retest it again until April. But you can see it's pretty much the same pattern, where it hits the 50% retracement mark, and then it fails the weekly SMA or the monthly SMA, and then it reclaims a bit of it back to the 50% retracement mark, or slightly above in this case. This is about the 50% retracement mark. And then it fails again. It makes one more attempt at the weekly SMA, and then it fails. And you can even consider this as well a fail. So like that broadly is what we have to continue looking forward to in this particular instance, is multiple failures of the weekly SMA and not even touching the monthly SMA. That is the reality of what happens in a bear market. I don't care who the president is. I don't care about all the laws they're going to sign. I don't care. Until Bitcoin stops behaving the way that it has always behaved on the chart, which again, a reminder, it is still currently doing exactly what it always does. Like for anyone that you're listening to that makes content that says the 4-year cycle is over, I don't even hear that many people saying that shit anymore, because so far it looks identical. It looks the same as all the other cycles. So what does that mean? That means we are likely going to see 76.2K. I really think 80K is more important personally, but it's not currently reading as a Fibonacci pivot, so we've got to go with the one that it's reading for us. We're going to form resistance around there, even if we break above it. We're going to slightly break above it. We're going to realize, oh shit, we don't have enough momentum to get above that 86K, and a bunch of those people who have bought right around there are going to realize, oh my God, I'm in 1% loss. Hell yeah, I'm selling this thing. I can't sell enough of it, you know. That is going to shift the amount of buyers from there down to in here, which just puts less and less likelihood that we're going to rise above those prices. All right, general thesis. Now let's go over shorter term. What is the 4-hour telling us for these trade setups? Now, I was paying attention when I saw this break. I did not take that trade. It didn't look like to me that we were going to see a significant drop, even though we did have a failure at that 71.8K pivot. I just think the amount of chop that we've had here as opposed to this one, again, this one, I did take that. I did take a short. I think I had to take it late. I took it in here, and I'm very happy with that trade. Made 23% on that trade, very happy with that. But that was an immediate one, and it's more likely that we're going to give back an immediate one when there's a lot of volume all at once. This was much more concentrated effort to try and get to 74. And this technically on that 4-hour candle was a failure, but I wouldn't really regard it as a significant failure. It's just another reattempt. And it's more likely that we're going to retest this guy here at 70.6. That's the 4-hour SMA again. At the moment, we are respecting the 4-hour SMA. It's starting to curve down a little bit, but we are above that downtrend anchor VWAP as well, as long as the SMA and the price stays above that. It is going to trend us towards that middle band, which again is around 85.4K, call it 86K. That's what we're going to trend toward. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to snap there immediately, but that is the trend that the price is going to head towards, is that 85.4, 86K. So what that means in the short term is you technically, if you could have just taken a short off of the reaction to that pivot. Come on. I hate you hotkeys. Oh my God. Work. Thank you. That is not the total amount. Obviously, it's a little bit higher, but easily could have taken a 2 or a 3% trade off that if you were really paying attention this morning. Probably would have had to see that flash It's a little bit more clear on the 1 hour. Again, it's tough because these also would have appeared clear as shorts, and you only would have gotten about a 1% trade off of those. That's why I definitely prefer the 4 hour to the 1 hour in terms of getting entries. But same thing for this, like that's a pretty nice scalp. Yeah, like a little bit less than 3%. That's a great scalp trade. So these scalp trades do exist. And again, specifically trading with leverage, 3% is not a ton unless you're trading with a shitload of money for spot. So, but if you're trading these Nano BTC perpetual contracts that I've been trading on Coinbase, which again, highly recommend, they're great. Look at this. Look at how much price is respecting that downtrend anchor VWAP. It really wanted confirmation that it's above it. And now with both the 4 hour and the 1 hour SMA being comfortably higher than it, that's good. That means we're going to form some support above that level. So again, I wouldn't be really hunting for a short now. I would be paying closer attention to where we can get a long. And I don't think that the 4 hour Bollinger Band is going to give it to us, unfortunately, unless we have a significant drop back down below one more time, which would put us just below 69K, 68.8K. It is possible. The point of control is a little bit lower than that, 67. So nothing really preventing the price from doing that. And again, if we think about this as a magnet, then it might retest it one more time before it snaps back in the other direction. But in general, you know, at the moment, it's still holding above that 71.8K pivot. So there's not a clear long here. Like I wouldn't say that there's a clear long entry here, but I am of the opinion that that is the general trajectory right now, is upward towards 86. I do not think that it goes there immediately. It will chop, again, especially depending on where it's able to close on the weekly time frame. If it's able to close above that 70.3K-ish, 70.2, 70.4, it's able to close above that, it's going to give us permission to head towards that 76.2K, which I don't even think is really, it's not relevant on the lower time frames. 74 is more what they're concerned with, and then 77.8 as well, which if we look at any historical context for that, that's mostly here. When we wick down in 2025 to, what is that, to the low of 74.4, and around 78.3 is where we actually opened. So those are people who had, bought the ETFs, probably bought more at that time, and are now in significant loss. And as you can see, a lot of those people ended up selling, it looks like. Whereas we're pretty thin there on the volume profile. So a lot of those individuals either ended up selling out between now and then, because that was a lot more full on the volume profile at that time, as well as we had a lot more volume up here at that time that started to thin out over time. So that's really what we're looking for, is a continuation of this trend towards the weekly SMA before ultimately a failure. And then off of that, which this will be a trade that I'll be taking off of the weekly time frame, and then I'm just going to let that run. I think like that's, if I'm looking for like my real, like where I would like to position a decent amount for a short, it would be right around at that 86K. This is not financial advice, but that's me personally, that's what I'm looking for. I wouldn't really be, again, you can take a long in here, you're just not going to get a clean entry. I mean, there's still like a 17-20% move between here and that target. So I would just be careful if you're trading with leverage, and again, look for some type of entry trigger. The only other entry trigger I could really think of is if we get another reaction to this 4-hour SMA at 70.5, 70.6, like I've talked about. That might be another instance where you can take a long like here. I don't really like using the SMA as an entry trigger because it can just as likely flip the other direction. Like there's nothing really preventing it from doing that. Like you wouldn't know at this time that you could have stayed in your long. You would have thought, all right, shit, I got to close that in profit. Like it's not as clear as like this guy, that's a short. you've made enough money, sell. You know, like this would have been great trade. You know, oh my God, sticky keys, go away. Like 4%, it's a 40% trade. It's really good on 10x leverage. So at the moment, technically, price would be telling us to short. However, I don't think that that short is much lower than about here, which means that best case scenario, you're scalping a 2% trade. Nothing wrong with that. However, I do think that it's more probable that it goes towards the upside, and that 2% trade would be very short. You would not be in that for very long. So general trend at the moment, I'm doing nothing personally. I'm gonna wait until I see, you know, does it have resistance at any of those higher term targets? Does it have resistance at 76.2K? Does it have resistance at 80K? And realistically, I would say the heavy shorts, I think are gonna be at 86. And then technically you could ride that for the rest of the year. You could ride that until October. I mean, there will probably be another instance where we, you know, break it and then head back below and we retest towards 64. Maybe we don't break 64 yet. And then we have one more retest of the weekly SMA and then it properly fails it. You know, because if we touch below 64K, then the next time that we actually interact with the SMA is probably going to be below the 76.2K pivot, you know, once we have a failure there, which is, again, it's going to put 73.8K and 69K as resistance instead of support at that time, which you have to imagine that's like over here, basically, June, July. And that would be one more failure before continued consolidation and final drop off closer to September, October. I know, so cheerful. Everyone loves these parts of the video, but I'm just trying to be realistic with you. Like that's what I think is gonna happen. So me personally, I'm waiting to build a short position once we have an interaction with the weekly SMA again. On the higher time frames, it's a little bit easier to take trades. I mean, in this instance, same thing, would have been hard to know exactly, other than just like this is like the third or fourth attempt at new all-time highs there. So, and it barely moved. Typically that indicates a failure at that time. And then it just became more significant once we actually lost the monthly and the weekly SMA. So yeah, unfortunately, not a lot of clear trades right now. Like nothing really telling you one way or the other, because technically this would tell you to short. I don't know that I agree with that. I think it's a very quick short that you would be taking, and it's more likely that it's going to continue rising. And then same thing on the 4 hour. Technically, those are short entries. However, I don't think it's going to go lower than the 4 hour SMA at the moment. It's looking kind of strong. They're trying to build some narrative around it in the news, I'm sure. I don't listen to that shit, but I'm sure that's what they're trying to do. All that matters really is a sustained reaction to 73.8K. That's the previous March 2024 all-time high, all the liquidity during the halving cycle. Very important psychologically for Bitcoin. So if we can start getting closes above that, cool. That gives us permission to head a little bit higher. The bottom of that trend in 2025 being around 76K, I believe, 78K. So that's going to be another important region where, again, we do not have a ton of volume. It's very thin there, which means that people either step in and continue through this chop to buy more than sell, which at the moment, that is the case. There's more buyers than sellers at the moment, which is good. It's just going to be the same circumstance. Is once we climb closer to that 86, all of these people who bought between 86 and call it 104K, all of those people are going to have to really test their conviction of, do I want to wait, another 4 or 5 years before my money is going to be in profit? Or am I willing to take a 5, 10, 15% haircut to get out of this position and move on with my life and maybe buy some gold or Labubus or Pokemon cards or whatever the fuck people buy when they're not buying Bitcoin? Anyways, that's the video. I would be careful about shorts at the moment, even though the chart is telling you to do so. I do think we are short-term going to go higher. I will update you on Sunday before the end of the week close. We'll just kind of do a temperature check Sunday morning. And then Monday, as always, I will have the new newsletter out. It was a little bit late last week because I had to get my car fixed, but now it's fixed, so it should be fine and I can get it out earlier. And on Monday's video, I will go over what the weekly close means and all of that. But again, I would imagine we're probably above this 50% mark. We're currently above it. It looks pretty healthy on the lower time frames at the moment. So I am biased towards into the end of March. I think we will see sustained pressure towards that 76.2K pivot. Hopefully it closes above it, ultimately resulting in a failure on the weekly SMA, even if we do break above it. Hopefully that helps. I will talk to you on Sunday's video. Have a great weekend, everybody.